be sure to check out Rob Plays. There you can hang out with me while we play video games and talk about life stuff. So as we continue our discussion on Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four, what we do here is we actually tie in to the events of Old Man Logan. Now this is really cool because a lot of people don't know that the Fantastic Four from Jonathan Hickman tied into Old Man Logan and actually followed up to it and told us what happened after the story came to an end. Now, something to keep in mind is that the Secret Wars version of Old Man Logan actually retconned this information from Hickman's Fantastic Four. And so this information in Hickman's run isn't really applicable anymore. For those of you guys who don't know, retcon is retroactive continuity. That means that somebody goes in and changes things, removes things. And so because the Old Man Logan Secret Wars event had basically provided new information, this information here isn't really relevant anymore with regards to the larger Marvel universe. But for the sake of our discussion and Hickman's run of the Fantastic Four, we can use this because it's still self-contained and it'll be very important to understanding the things that happen later on down the line. But for those of you guys who never read Old Man Logan, this was a story that was written as an alternate universe that basically depicted a world where the supervillains had taken over everything. What ended up happening here is that because humanity and the superheroes were not necessarily as powerful as the villains, there were always a multitude of circumstances whereby the villains could have taken over. But the reason why they didn't was because they could never work together. They had their own agendas, they were infighting, they wanted to destroy their own nemesis, or maybe they just simply wanted to take over the world, but for whatever reason, they thought only about themselves and they weren't thinking about other things. And so what ended up happening here is that within the realm, within the universe of Old Man Logan, under the leadership of the Red Skull, the supervillains of the world launched multiple attacks against the superheroes of the world at the same time, meaning the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, the Inhumans, the X-Men, they were all attacked simultaneously. Now, these attacks weren't necessarily done by brute force, which is to say the supervillains didn't just charge buildings and attack everyone. Instead, they used stealth, they used guile, and they used espionage to achieve their goal. Within the realm of Old Man Logan, within the context of Wolverine himself, what we're told is that the Spider-Man villain Mysterio had the ability to create illusions that manipulated the five senses, basically your sense of smell, touch, taste, so on and so forth. And so what ends up happening is Mysterio travels to the X-Men mansion and tricks Wolverine into believing that the villains of the Marvel Universe are attacking the mansion. And so Wolverine goes through and kills every last one of them. But once the illusion is revealed, we learn that Wolverine had actually killed all of the X-Men. And because of his healing factor, all of their attacks to him did no damage. And so with Wolverine realizing what it is that he's done, he actually goes into a state of isolation and refuses to pop his claws again. Now, following Wolverine's time away, the superheroes began getting killed off by the supervillains until there was no one left to stop the supervillains from taking over the world. Now, while we're only told what goes on within the context of the United States, what we know is that the country itself was divided into sections, with the Red Skull taking over Washington, D.C. and the surrounding areas in the Northeast, and everybody taking whatever else was left. And so while people like Magneto took over Middle America, Magneto himself was killed, with his section being taken over by the Kingpin. But in terms of Wolverine, while he's attempting to live a quiet life, he started a family of his own, but he lives under the rule of the Incredible Hulk. Now, following the events of these supervillains taking over the world, the Incredible Hulk Bruce Banner had actually mated with his cousin, She-Hulk, because as he explained it, she was the only one that he could procreate with. And so the result was that they produced a litany of incestuous kids. Now, where the events during Old Man Logan would have Hawkeye show up at the front door of Wolverine for the purpose of having Logan accompany him across the country in an effort to take super soldier serums to the various underground resistance groups in New York in order to improve their efforts to defeat the supervillains, with Wolverine being gone, we actually learn that the family of the Incredible Hulk killed his family. And so once the entire effort of the resistance movement is shown to have been a ruse by the Red Skull for the purpose of eliminating what was left of the superhero community, when Wolverine gets back home, he finds out that his entire family has been killed by Bruce Banner's family. And so in response, he pops his claws for the first time in something like 50 years and kills the Incredible Hulk, as well as virtually everybody else in his family, save for the Incredible Hulk's son, Hulk Jr. Now, where Old Man Logan ended with Wolverine taking Hulk Jr. and riding off into the sunset, we didn't know how things ended. We didn't necessarily know what came next. With Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four, it follows up to that. What we're told is that following this, Wolverine had basically initiated a giant resistance group, bringing together various humans and what was left of the superhero community that was in hiding, and led a revolution against all the supervillains of the world, killing them all and taking the planet back. And so where humanity spent the next several decades, even the next 100 years, basically going through and rebuilding itself, about 500 years after the events of Old Man Logan ended, Galactus returned and tried to consume the planet. Now by this time, Hulk Jr. is old and he actually looks almost identical to the Maestro from the Incredible Hulk stories, which you'll find down in the description of this video. But what we learn is that the remaining superheroes, or those superheroes who have begun developing new powers and mutants who have emerged, basically lead an attack against Galactus, but a multitude of them are completely obliterated by the power that Galactus possesses. Now while Galactus is defeated, because he's basically killed, what ends up happening is Hulk Jr. alongside various other individuals begin terraforming Galactus, turning him into an object that can be used to travel into the past for the purpose of preserving humanity. And the reason why is because as time progressed, whether the planet had been consumed by Galactus or not, it was going to become uninhabitable for a variety of reasons, and humanity would simply cease to exist. And so what this does is this actually jumps back to the present day, and we pick up with the Fantastic Four alongside a relatively new character named Alyssa Moy. Now, Alyssa Moy was introduced as part of Mark Millar's run on the Fantastic Four prior to Jonathan Hickman's run, and what Alyssa Moy was established as being was the girlfriend, or I guess the ex-girlfriend, of Reed Richards prior to his marriage to Susan Storm, and Alyssa Moy is actually as smart as Reed Richards is. And so the conclusion that Alyssa Moy came to was that by virtue of terraforming, by virtue of pollution, a multitude of other problems, the Earth at some point in the future would become uninhabitable. Now this does not mean that Alyssa Moy knew that Old Man Logan was going to happen. In fact, Old Man Logan is now an alternate reality, so that future will not happen. But because of the fact that she believes that the Earth is going to become uninhabitable at some point in time, she, alongside a man named Ted Castle, who's also as intelligent as Reed Richards, had developed something called New World. And this was basically an artificially created planet Earth that would exist so that when the time came that the normal Earth was not habitable anymore, humanity could move from the normal Earth to New Earth and live there. And so what ends up happening is once Hulk Jr. and those various forces from the future travel into the past in an effort to save humanity, they encounter resistance from the Fantastic Four, who don't want their planet to be destroyed before it needs to be. And so what happens here is once the conflict begins to quell, once the Fantastic Four and Hulk Jr. and the various other forces begin to talk things out and realize what's going on, ultimately the Fantastic Four put the Incredible Hulk and those individuals on New World and then send them on their way. Now the reason why I brought this up and the reason why this matters is that for those of you guys who were reading Time Runs Out by Jonathan Hickman, the events that led into Secret Wars, there was a comic whereby Captain America attained the Time Gem and began jumping forward in the future, and there was one instance whereby Ultron had taken over the world. That was not the Age of Ultron story. What that was Alex Ultron. During the events when the Incredible Hulk and those individuals in the future were trying to preserve their planet, there was one being named Alex Ultron who was actually the epitome of the Ultron program in terms of an individual, meaning that from the time that Ultron was first created by Hank Pym up until that point in time, Alex Ultron represented the peak of the Ultron programming. And so what ends up happening is that once they're set on New World and they're sent off along their way, Alex Ultron begins to evolve and begins to grow to the point where it actually goes out on its own and then creates a planet Ultron in and of itself, and then eventually comes back to Earth and tries to take things over again. Now again, that was an alternate reality, but I just wanted to bring that up because I wanted to show you guys how everything in Jonathan Hickman's writing is all interconnected. But again, we'll get back into Franklin Richards' future self, restoring the powers of his younger self in the next video, because what we're actually going to find is there's a lot going on. There's all different kinds of things behind the scenes, and that this is really all just a story about a son trying to save his dad. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll catch you guys later. Peace. So as we get back into the pattern of DC Rebirth, what I want to do here is have a discussion on Nightwing. And what I'm hoping is that at the end of all this, you'll walk away with a better understanding of Dick Grayson, as well as what DC Rebirth means for his character regarding the foreseeable future. And so much like the rest of DC's Rebirth line of comics, Nightwing gives us a return to the pre-New 52 era of his character while combining it with popular elements from the New 52. To To sidetrack here, when DC initiated the line-wide reboot of their various characters, teams, and universes, Dick Grayson stood as one of a handful of characters being watched closely by comic fans. The reason for this was that